Hello there, folks. Let's talk about sex. Well, not really. Let's talk about the third grave precept in Buddhism. Now, this one is a difficult one to get into because there's so many different interpretations. First off, let's look at the Chinese characters used to express the third precept. The first Chinese character you'll see there is not, does not, don't. A very easy character. The second one is defined as to desire, to crave, to want. Desire, greed, craving, covetousness. In the Yogacara consciousness theory, one of the 6 primary afflictions in the Abhidharma Kosabhasa, one of the 6 undetermined elements, also commonly seen in the compound words tanai and tanyu, the mental action of attaching to objects and situations one finds to be compatible to one's own disposition. So that's the first form of the word desire that we come to. And then the second form of the word desire we get to in that the third character in that string of 4 characters, desire, especially sexual desire, the mistaken actions that result from sexual passion, sexual intercourse between male and female, also licentious, lewd, adultery, fornication, and so forth. And then the fourth one is just precept. So that makes the whole thing very interesting. What I've been doing in this series is to give you like the standard version first, but the standard version for this one is difficult to come by. What you normally hear in American Buddhist centers is do not misuse sexuality. But if you went to Nishijima Roshi, who was my teacher, he gave this precept as don't desire too much. So let's see what he says about that. He says, we all have desire. Desire is an important factor in our life, but excessive desire is not the origin of happiness. It destroys our composure. Too much desire tends to make our life unhappy. So Gautama Buddha recognized the existence of desire, but he warned against too much indulgence. He advised us not to desire too much. That's what my teacher Nishijima Roshi said. If we go to the Brahmajala Sutra, which is a 5th century Chinese work that sought to give wider definitions to the precepts, they say, a disciple of the Buddha must not engage in licentious acts or encourage others to do so. And now, remember, they're talking about a heterosexual male monk, which was considered the standard in those days. You know, that's just how it was. They say, as a monk, he should not have sexual relations with any female, be she a human, animal, deity, or spirit, nor create the causes, conditions, methods, or karma of such misconduct. Indeed, he must not engage in improper sexual conduct with anyone. A Buddha's disciple ought to have a mind of filial piety, rescuing all sentient beings and instructing them in the dharma of purity and chastity. If instead he lacks compassion and encourages others to engage in sexual relations promiscuously, including with animals, or even their mothers, daughters, sisters, and other close relatives, he commits a major offense. So that's pretty interesting. There are various versions you'll find in the United States and other English-speaking countries, and here's a few of them. Griffith Folk says not to engage in sex. Shasta Abbey's version is the third grave precept on coveting. So, you know, there already is another precept on coveting, so I don't know what they're going to do with that one. Nishijima Roshi apparently gave it as not to lust in his early days. Boundless Way Zen Center has, treating all beings with respect and dignity, I vow to take up the way of not misusing sex. Let's see. Honor the body, do not misuse sexuality. That's John Daido Lori. Remaining faithful in relationship. Those are the Clear Mind precepts. I'm not sure who made those up. Great Vow Zen Monastery. I vow not to misuse sexual energy, but be respectful in mind and action. Oh boy, there's a whole bunch of them. Koben Chino's version, which we're going to talk about in a second here, is no attachment to fulfillment. So that's quite different. And he has another version also attributed to Koben, not misusing sexuality, honor the body. Let's see, a longer one. It says Appleton Zen Center has, be loving. I am conscious and loving in all my relationships. In sexuality, I discern the difference between love and lust and do not take advantage of other human beings. I transform the arising of lust into true loving. Mel Weitzman has, I resolve not to misuse sexuality, but to remain faithful in relationships. And the ever useful Diane Eshin Risetto, who always comes up with long ones, has, I take up the way of engaging in sexual intimacy respectfully and with an open heart. I take up the way of stepping into sexual intimacy not only naked in body, but in heart. And I take up the way of meeting the craving as well as the fear of the craving, the desire for closeness as well as the fear of closeness, the greed for power as well as the fear of power, the escape as well as the union. Boy, that was really detailed. Now, I had, in previous videos, I'd been giving the Bodhidharma One Mind Precepts version early on, but I decided to save that for this one to bring it to later because this is very confusing, right? Here it is. This is the Bodhidharma One Mind Precept version, which I talked about a few videos ago if you want to go look at what that is. It is. Self-nature is mysteriously profound. Truth of no attachment. Not to give birth to attaching to loving is called no desiring, no wrong, no scattered desiring. And here is what Kobanchino says about this. I'm going to skip around. First, he talks about it in relation to the idea of not committing adultery, which is a place where it dovetails or whatever, it matches one of the 10 Commandments. But he also says, it is only in very recent times that I really notice the difference between purity of love and attachment, and I'm very much aware of my attachment in love. One is attached to parts of the whole thing. I really understand now why Bodhidharma said not to give birth to attachment is the truth of non-attachment. Non-attachment is truth. To be fond of things, particularly your favorite things, is what attachment means. In such situations, we give birth to attachment. I like this, I don't like this. But when we begin to sense why we like this and don't like that, it becomes very complicated. Sometimes unlike and dislike go together. Sometimes alike and dislike go together. That is, if you see somebody who is very much like you, you dislike that person. I know that one. This sticking to each other or rejecting each other is very hard because intellect doesn't help, and emotion is no way to solve it. And a little further down he says, there is only you and absolute being. So there is basic confusion in having two objects as the absolute. Yet the ethical meaning of this precept is quite obvious. Adultery is a confused state. It causes separation from relating with whom you really wish to relate. This is a kind of chasing after many rabbits and not being able to catch one. The basic problem is not objective, but rather subjective. The absolute has many symbolic forms and images, which actually represent what you were born as and whom you are serving. The absolute is this one. It is who we are. This is why we keep following the life of no identity, in order to cleanse our life. It is continually important to have an appreciation for who and what formed you, which is watching your life. And he goes on from there, but it's a quite interesting little passage. That is from Embracing Mind, the Zen Talks of Kobanchino Otogawa. Highly recommended. I use this book a lot. And here, just to confuse you even more, Dogen's commentary on the precepts, he says, the three wheels are pure and clear. When you have nothing to desire, you follow the way of all Buddhas. And I was looking up what the three wheels are, because that comes up often in Buddhism, but the internet was no use at all. They had all kinds of answers. It was all over the map. Could be Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, giver, receiver, and gift, according to one translation of the meal chant. Body, speech, and mind, greed, anger, and ignorance is what John Daido Loori thinks it means, in that case, in the sense of what Dogen is saying here. So the three wheels are pure. I will have to dig up Dogen and ask him what he meant by that, because we don't know. This is a tricky precept. I wrote a book called Sex, Sin, and Zen a few years ago, in which I tried, among other things, to take on the way sex was viewed mainly by Western Buddhists in the modern era. There were a couple of books that already existed that traced the history of how sex had been viewed by Buddhists in the past. There was one called The Red Thread. I can't remember what the other one was, but there were two books that I read about that, and I thought, well, that's really interesting, but what are contemporary Buddhists doing? So I wrote a lot about that in that book. But the book tended to come off more as a book about ethics, the ethics question as represented by sex, in which is sex is a place where ethics can go terribly wrong or terribly right. Terribly right? Well, it can go beautifully right, depending on how you use it, and this is why it's an important thing to address, and it's why the Buddhists chose to address it. But what I like is Nishijima Roshi's version and also Kobun Chino's version, which just get sex out of the picture entirely and talk about desire or attachment. Because I think those things are much more fundamental. Those things are much more universal than sex. So if you want a precept that kind of just addresses things in the sort of regular world, then making a precept of not misusing sex is a good idea. But of course, then you have to define what misuse of sex is, and that gets all tricky, and you saw how some of these versions that I read got very convoluted, and you could spend all day trying to figure out what is a misuse and what is not a misuse, and whether it's a misuse in this situation, and the same thing is actually not a misuse in another situation. It gets very crazy. But if you get into the idea of what is desire and what is attachment, then this is something that happens in all situations. And desire and attachment are very tricky. Kobun Chino is a person who was married several times. I've forgotten, I think maybe 3 times. Somebody may correct me if I'm wrong about that. So he had a complicated relationship with that, and in other parts of this book he mentions that, not in great detail, but he does allude to this fact that he has this kind of history that's sort of unusual for a Zen Buddhist monk. Japanese Zen Buddhist monks often get married, but not 3 times. So that's quite interesting. So he has that take on it, and of course I'm attached to things. I'm staying at my girlfriend's house, and her parents are right next door, so I'm very attached to them. I have Ziggy the dog, who I'm now very attached to, and it's a difficult thing. But attachment, as I understand it, is more of an attachment to keeping things in one form forever. It's not necessarily that you love your puppy dog or love your boyfriend or girlfriend in a kind of pure way that changes from day to day and is what it is. It's more the idea that this thing must stay this way forever. Like if I insisted that Ziggy stay a puppy forever, that would be a kind of attached loving to where I don't like him now that he's an adult dog, and he's boring, and I only liked him as a puppy. That would be how I think of as attachment, among many other ways of thinking of attachment. So this video has already gone on too long, and I know I haven't given you the full story of the thing, but I think that's good enough for something to kind of chew on if you want to think about that precept. And if you want to think about me thinking about the precept and send me money while you're doing it, that's a terrible transition. My address to send donations to is on your screen right now. Also, if you're watching on YouTube, there will be direct links to my Patreon and PayPal accounts. That is how I make most of my living, and has been for the past 5 or more years. So those donations help out a tremendous amount, and thank you for sending them. If you are having financial trouble, don't send me a donation. Please don't do that. I'll be okay, but for those of you who are sending them, thank you very much. We will see you later. Have a good time all the time. Bye.